Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the magical, dramatic, and sometimes downright brutal world of MementoMori. And yep, you guessed it, we're talking about the best witches for PvP. Whether you're grinding your way up the Battle League or trying to make a name for yourself in the intense chaos of the Legend League, picking the right characters can make all the difference. So if you've ever wondered which witches are dominating the meta or which ones are better left on the bench, you're in the right place. In this video, we're breaking down our official PvP tier list for MementoMori. We've ranked the top performing witches based on their effectiveness, survivability, and how much they can wreck your opponents in real PvP matches. And don't worry, this isn't just a list of names. We're going to chat about why they made it to their spots on the list, with some quick analysis to help you build your dream PvP team. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking characters for PvP in MementoMori. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The characters for PvP in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Olivia and Sabrina. Alright, let's dive into the C tier witches. The ones that kind of make you go, maybe not my first pick for player versus player battles. First up, we have Olivia. Now, Olivia's definitely not a total flop. She's actually a decent support witch in player versus environment content, meaning she does her job well when you're tackling PvE missions. But PvP? Oh boy, that's a different story. In PvP, Olivia's role as an attack buffer just doesn't hit the mark compared to other witches. You're honestly better off saving your precious gear for someone else who can really bring the heat. Moving on to Sabrina, who's a bit of an oddball. She's not exactly the star attacker you want leading your team, but she brings some quirky utility. Sabrina can slow down enemies by decreasing their speed, which is kinda neat because slowing down your opponent can really mess up their game plan. Plus, she's got this cool trait where she can shrug off every debuff she gets. Talk about resilience. But here's the kicker. Even with that, she still falls behind other witches when it comes to dealing actual damage. So she's more like the reliable sidekick than the flashy hero. The thing with these C-tier witches is that they each have their niche, but it's pretty niche indeed. Olivia's support skills work okay in PvE, but PvP is a different beast that demands more aggressive or game-changing abilities. Sabrina's speed control and debuff immunity make her a bit more useful in PvP than in PvE, but even then, she's overshadowed by witches that can hit harder and faster. So if you're hunting for witches to dominate in player versus player combat, these two are probably not your best bet. At the end of the day, it's like picking a team for a party. You want the ones who bring the loudest tunes and the best moves, not just the ones who politely show up. Olivia and Sabrina? They're more like that friend who shows up with snacks but doesn't dance much. Nice to have around sometimes, but don't expect them to steal the spotlight on the dance floor. The characters for PvP in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Tropon, Rian, Mori, Fenrir, Chiffon, Sophia, Fortina, Winter Tropon, Giluial, Morgana, Alexandra, Summer Mori, Vila, Valeride, Natasha, Luke, Myrtillier, Leia, Amor, Claudia, Lysolate, Frisia, Winter Lunalin, Irene, Artoria, Hathor, and Sonia. When it comes to B-tier witches in MementoMori's player versus player battles, you're dealing with some interesting characters who definitely have their moments, but also a few quirks that hold them back. Take Tropon, for example. She's one of those witches who gets stronger the longer she sticks around, dealing more damage the more time she survives. Sounds great, right? But the catch is she really needs teammates who can shield her or give defensive buffs, because without protection, she's just a sitting duck. Honestly, there are other attackers who can do the job without the babysitting required. Then there's Reen, who's a bit of a glass cannon with a twist. She only really turns up the heat once her health drops below 50%, thanks to her passive skill, Feisty Determination, that boosts her critical hit chance by up to 60%. Pretty spicy. But just like Tropon, Reen can't take hits well and depends on someone else to soak up damage or slap on some shields. Her own shield only kicks in at the very start of the fight, so she needs backup for the long haul. Mori is another wildcard in this tier. She's got some cool tricks like poisoning enemies to whittle them down over time, and even counterattacking when hit, which can be super satisfying to watch. The downside? She's pretty fragile and can easily get knocked out if left alone. Keeping her alive is the name of the game, so she's best used with some solid protection. Fenrir's role is a bit niche. Since healing in PvP isn't really all that impressive, her main claim to fame is reducing the cooldown of a nearby witch's skills. If your main attacker's skill cooldown is a bottleneck, Fenrir can be a clutch choice. Otherwise, she doesn't bring much else to the party. Then we've got Chiffon, who's kind of the Swiss Army knife of support witches. She heals, buffs attack and defense, grants shields, and even debuffs enemies by lowering their critical resistance and putting them to sleep. Sounds amazing, right? Well, her second skill's target is random, so sometimes she might accidentally heal the enemy instead of hurting them. Talk about bad luck. Plus, you'll need to invest in boosting her attack stat to make her healing worthwhile. Sophia shines more with her unique weapon that gives her a big boost to counterattacks, meaning she dishes damage back whenever an enemy hits her. Sounds cool, but she's pretty squishy since she doesn't have defensive buffs. She relies mostly on health and critical resistance, which might not be enough to keep her standing and countering. Fortina's main job is to hand out shields to her team, but with healing still weak in PvP, her overall usefulness is kind of limited, unless you have plenty of resources to spare. Winter Tropon is a sneaky one. She can steal buffs from enemies and suck away their attack and defense stats. Plus, she can throw out a faint debuff on the whole enemy team, though the chance is only 20%, so it's a bit of a gamble. Giluiel and Morgana both bring silence effects to the table, which can be handy for shutting down enemy skills. However, other witches offer more flexibility alongside their silence, so these two tend to play second fiddle. Alexandra dishes out decent damage plus a bleed effect that ticks away over time, but she really needs top-tier gear to shine. So if you're not ready to invest heavily, she might not be worth the effort compared to other attackers who can make better use of good gear. Summer Mori is one of those witches who really loves longer fights. Her poison stacks up, triggering buffs that increase her attack and allow her to hit more often, making her better suited for PvP's drawn-out battles rather than quick PvE skirmishes. Vila is okay if you manage to get her, mainly because she can debuff enemies by lowering their attack and speed. If she's your fastest unit, she can cripple the enemy team right at the start, unless the opponents have a witch that can clear debuffs. Valeridi dishes out bursts of physical attacks, but her skill's random targeting makes her a bit unreliable. You never know if she'll hit the guy you want or just some random enemy. Natasha, much like Armstrong, requires investment to unlock her potential, but even then, she tends to get outclassed by other units. That said, she's one of the easier Radiance witches to pull copies of, so if you're a collector, she's not a bad addition. Luke has a pretty neat niche as a shield breaker, which can be a pain for enemies hiding behind protective units. She also can boost your main attacker's critical resistance by a whopping 60% if placed right next to them, giving your team some defensive edge. Mertilier and Leah both offer big attack boosts that help your main attacker pack more punch, but they need to survive at least until turn 2 to cast their buffs. Something that's easier said than done in PvP, where things get messy fast. Amor is alright support-wise for PvE, but in PvP she's only really useful if your enemy has healing. Otherwise, her niche is taken by Amleth, who fills that role better. Claudia brings some powerful attacks to PvP and can counter witches that rely heavily on evasion. The catch is her passives slowly drain her health, so she needs good healing or tanky teammates to keep her fighting. Lisa Lotte is a strong AoE damage dealer with crowd control abilities, capable of disabling multiple enemies and buffing herself with an attack boost. She's great for clearing waves and disrupting enemy teams. Frisia's healing and evasion buffs just don't cut it in PvP compared to stronger supports like Diane. Plus, her buffs can get stolen, so it's better to slot in a support who directly buffs attack or defense. Winter Lunalin is great if you need multi-barriers in your team, but again, there are other units who can boost your main attacker's damage more effectively. Irene's debuffs mostly don't work in PvP, and she's a Radiance type that takes a while to awaken, so she tends to be less useful in this mode. Artoria only really shines if you're running Crimson units because her speed buff applies only to them. She has a high base speed and can boost the attack of the slowest ally, which can be handy in slower team comps. Hathor can debuff enemy attack, but she's less useful overall compared to Rusalka, who combines debuffs with solid attacking power. Lastly, Sonya isn't the most remarkable attacker, but she does boost all allies' attack and max health by 3% with her passive skill Viking Power, which is a nice little team buff to have. The characters for PvP in this tier are in order from top left to bottom right: Sultina, Mimi, Florence, MementoMori, Feni, Carol, Priscilla, Riches, Summer Cordy, Summer Sabrina, Asahi, Uni, Matilda, Mila, Air, Aine, Tama, Eureka, Tilly, Spring Shizu, Rustica, Didi, Potpourri, Madi, Amleth, Tainted Iris, Winter Amor, and Ophelia. If you're looking for a solid tank who can also mess with the enemy's status, Sultina is definitely worth considering in PvP. She's not just bulky thanks to her multi-barrier, but also applies sleep and faint debuffs, which can really turn the tide of battle. Just keep in mind she needs some investment in her critical and magic stats to make those debuffs stick. Of course, she's not invincible. Teams running Florence Primavera in front, or Mimi, can really give her trouble. Speaking of Mimi, she remains a valuable asset from PvE to PvP because of her resonance debuff. It's a clever way to bypass tanky witches by hitting the enemy with the lowest defense instead, perfect for burst damage teams. The catch? Opponents can boost another unit's defense with runes to dodge that debuff, and some witches like Carol can even draw Mimi's resonance away from your main attacker. Florence is a bit of a mixed bag in PvP. She dishes out heavy damage but is often countered by many units, so she's more of a stepping stone if you're transitioning from PvE to PvP. She's useful for climbing ranks early on, but you'll want to trade her for more PvP specialized witches later. MementoMori can be a beast if you put the work into her. She shines when taking down sniper witches like Cordy and gets a huge attack boost when an ally falls, making her a solid choice for aggressive lineups. Feni's specialty lies in dealing with buff-heavy teams by applying buff immunity to multiple enemies. That said, Primavera is a non-limited witch who does this even better with more precision, so Feni's niche is somewhat narrow. Carol can be a handy pick mainly because she can soak up Mimi's resonance debuff, sparing your main attackers from its effects. Outside of that, her defense-focused toolkit and silence debuffs are a bit underwhelming compared to higher-tier witches. Priscilla plays the support role beautifully by cleansing debuffs from your main attacker and providing regeneration healing. She's surprisingly tanky thanks to her high base HP and self-buffs on defense, which helps her stay in the fight longer. Riches fills a very unique and niche role. If your team is speed-tuned, so your main attacker moves last and is fully buffed, she'll cover them with defense and shield buffs that can keep them alive through the thickest battles. It's a very specific setup, but when it fits, it's gold. Summer Cordy is a nice support, similar to her regular version. While she's easy to take down in fights, her first skill can boost your main attacker's chance to hit by 25%, which can really help against tricky teams that feature Nina. Summer Sabrina gets better the more you level her up, especially after level 161. She can feint the enemy with the highest HP and dispel buffs from the weakest, and at higher levels, she can lower the critical resistance of up to 4 enemies for several turns, setting them up perfectly for follow-up attacks. Asahi shines when you're facing enemies who rely on ramping damage, like Ilya's God's Curse or Florence. She can outpace them by building up her own attack damage faster, making her a great counter in those matchups. Uni is solid support with consistent healing and debuff cleansing at max level, making her a great counter to negative effects. With her high defense and critical hit resistance, she stays on the field longer to support the team effectively. Pairing her with Fia helps unlock her full damage potential. Matilda is excellent in teams that focus on single-target elimination. She dishes heavy damage with her active skill and provides an undispellable attack buff to herself and her strongest teammate, enabling quick takedowns. Her passive is versatile too, adjusting her damage type and healing based on the situation, making her flexible and reliable. Mila is a solid support for Emerald damage dealers because she can buff their HP based on her attack stat, helping them survive longer in battles. Ayer reminds me a bit of Primavera since they both target the unit directly in front of them. She's great at inflicting sleep and movement-impairing debuffs, but this makes her vulnerable to counters like Cordy and Fortina, who can shut down those debuffs. Aine is tricky to use because her most powerful skill, Air of Eternity, only activates after the 10th turn, long after most fights are decided, so she often ends up defeated before she can shine. Tama gets some PvP love mainly because she can grant huge shields to Amber Soul allies like Mimi or Vila. That's pretty useful, but also limits her effectiveness outside of Amber-heavy teams. Eureka's main value is in survivability for your attackers. When she dies, she grants a shield to the ally with the highest attack, but you'll want to boost her attack stat so the shield scales nicely. Tilly is a fantastic support for Emerald teams. She piles on max HP buffs for days, boosts your main attacker's attack, and grants critical resistance buffs to the highest attack allies. She's also great for breaking down enemies relying on multi-barriers. Although limited and requiring some investment, she's worth the effort. Shizu can be helpful against fast teams, but as a Crimson DPS who trades her own HP for damage, she's fragile and needs to be at least LR rarity to be effective. On the plus side, she's easier to upgrade than Radiant or Chaos limited units. Rustica is versatile and can play both DPS and support roles. She boosts your main attacker with HP drain and attack buffs if that ally received the most buffs in a turn, plus she can shield them up to a massive 800% of her HP if you're running a majority Amber team. Using her as an attacker means committing to Amber and investing upgrades. DD slots nicely into Emerald teams if you need critical resistance buffs and someone dedicated to inflicting fainted on enemies. But if you've already got units covering those roles, she's not essential. Potpourri is potentially useful against fast opponents in PvP, but like Rustica, she requires a commitment to Crimson, and there are cheaper alternatives out there. Amleth has a neat immortality buff, but it can be stolen by witches like Tropon or Nina, which can leave her vulnerable in defense. Tainted Iris is a heavy-hitting attacker who also protects your main attacker with shields. Once fully unlocked, her skills let her debuff enemy attack stats and then multiply her damage based on that debuff, making her a powerful threat. Winter Amor is a top-tier support who cuts all allies' damage taken by 30%, reduces their skill cooldowns, and boosts their critical hit chances. She's also a decent damage dealer herself, especially when her HP drops below 50%, triggering damage multipliers and self-revival. Ophelia works both as a main attacker and a retaliator. She taunts enemies to hit her and hits back hard with a 50% counter boost. The downside is she can be countered easily by high evasion Ninos who can steal her buffs. The characters for PvP in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Merlin, Cordy, Summer Nina, Palladia, Cerberus, Elfride, AA, Armstrong, Civi, Stella, Artie, Witch Ilia, Apostle Rosalie, Primavera, Lunalyn, Summer Amleth, Belle, Kaguya, Ceruria, Diane, Miria, Festive Natasha, and Pola. Merlin remains a staple support unit even in PvP, thanks to her skill Like Master Would Do, which grants up to a 40% ATK boost at the start of battle. To get the most out of her, you'll want to fine-tune her SPD so she acts before your main attacker. On top of that, her ability to dispel buffs, like Amleth's invulnerability, makes her a versatile asset when she's alive long enough to use it. Cordy is a great transitional unit from PvE to PvP, especially if you're just getting into competitive modes. With the right SPD runes, she can wipe most of the enemy team in the first turn. Later on, when she's no longer your main attacker, she still provides massive value with her unique weapon that lowers enemy DEF by 80%, setting the stage for your other attackers. Summer Nina brings a defensive edge, cleansing debuffs and shielding your main damage dealer, all while boosting their ATK. Her support becomes even more powerful when she's hit with a movement-reducing debuff, making her a key cleanser buffer hybrid. Palladia, on the other hand, excels as a Chaos Soul support with her powerful Bulletstorm skill and crit-enhancing buffs. She pairs especially well with other Chaos units and adds protective barriers to her team, making her a hybrid offensive support. Cerberus is a brutal executioner who can instantly finish off enemies below 15% HP with her Storm of Tartarus skill. If you build her ATK stat properly, she becomes lethal. Her first skill also shreds enemy P-Def, making physical follow-up attacks more effective. Elfride is capable of dealing heavy damage but relies heavily on a setup involving stacked buffs on allies and debuffs on enemies. Despite her defensive skills, she's still fragile and struggles against barrier-heavy units like Sultina. AA stands out for her high burst damage in the early turns and her ability to cut incoming damage. However, she's vulnerable to faint debuffs, and once her damage reduction fades, she becomes easy to pick off. Armstrong might not be the best PvP investment, but if you already have her, she's a durable secondary attacker who can buff crit chance, though Merlin offers a similar buff at a lower cost. Civi provides a mix of offense and support. Her Fortifying Blade skill boosts her damage output the longer she takes hits and stays alive, and she can pass that buff on to two slower allies. She also buffs Def and P-Def, self-cleanses debuffs, and gains a damage cut every few turns. Stella is a solid single-target attacker with strong damage potential, but she shines most for her silence debuff, which can prevent enemies from using skills if her STR is high enough. Artie is a valuable support who debuffs enemies MDF, helping magic attackers like Rusalka or AA hit harder. She also acts as a cleanup unit to eliminate weakened foes. Witch Ilya, God's Curse version, is another high-damage chaos unit that thrives with a specific setup. After surviving 10 attacks, she gains access to a cooldown-free version of her first active skill. However, being a chaos unit means she requires significant investment to reach her potential. Apostle Rosalie focuses on shielding adjacent allies and stacking memory buffs whenever her team is debuffed. At 15 stacks, she delivers a flurry of attacks and reduces the cooldowns of her nearby allies, making her a powerful momentum builder. Primavera combines support and crowd control by buffing allies ATK and SPD while applying feint to enemies. She can shut down buff-heavy opponents by forcing key units into feint, though this strategy can be countered by teams with multiple attackers. Lunalyn might not seem like much at first glance, but with boosted crit, she can silence entire enemy teams if her hits land right. This makes her incredibly useful in fast kill team comps. Summer Amleth uses her immortality debuff to prolong battles, buying time for slower allies to scale up. She also reduces enemy defenses, giving her dual utility as a disruptor and debuffer. Belle is a high-risk, high-reward attacker who stacks bleed, dispels enemy buffs, and gains a self-activating shield below 30% HP. With the right team around her, she can be a long-lasting DPS threat. Kaguya is a counter-based attacker who thrives when supported with protective skills. When debuffed by an active skill, she retaliates by reducing the attacker's offensive stats, making her a strong anti-aggression option. Ceruria shines in a very specific PvP role, countering Nina mains. When a buff is stolen from her, she grants her team a huge ACC boost, making her a solid niche pick for high-investment players. Diane is ranked here mainly for her synergy with Nina, boosting her EVD to ridiculous levels. However, beware of enemy Ninas stealing that EVD right back. Maria works best in mono-soul teams, where she passively boosts SPD. She's a strong PvP pick if your team composition fits her requirements. Festive Natasha is an all-out damage dealer with built-in damage reduction, capable of outputting massive burst numbers. However, her lack of strong defenses and low hit count make her fragile and somewhat inconsistent. Lastly, Pola is a reliable tank for Emerald-based teams. She has solid damage resistance, self-healing, and even spreads buffs during heals, making her a great frontliner if you need someone to soak up hits. The characters for PvP in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Faya, Rusalka, and Nina. In the S+ tier of MementoMori's PvP meta, we find the absolute top-performing witches, units that define the battlefield and dominate competitive play with the right setups. At the forefront is Fia, a powerhouse retaliator whose potential skyrockets with proper investment. What makes Faya terrifying in PvP is her ability to punish aggressive teams that try to end fights quickly. Her Grim Retribution skill reflects up to 20% of the damage she's just received, essentially punishing enemies for daring to hit her. If your opponent fails to eliminate her by turn 2, there's a good chance their team will be crippled or outright decimated by her counterattack. And it doesn't stop there. Thanks to her HP drain and other healing-based buffs, she can recover rapidly and survive long enough to unleash Grim Retribution again, making her a monstrous tank damage hybrid that thrives in prolonged battles. Next is Rusalka, a deceptively powerful Radiant Soul Witch who balances offense and utility. Even with low investment, she brings incredible value by applying ATK debuffs that soften enemy teams' damage output. But where she really shines is in high-investment PvP builds. Once she hits level 221, she gains a permanent 30% PM. DF break buff when under 50% HP, and that buff becomes especially dangerous when paired with mag runes and PM. DF break skills. Equipped with strong gear, Rusalka becomes a relentless offensive force, shredding through enemy defenses while weakening their ability to retaliate. She's also remarkably consistent, rare among damage dealers, and her self-sufficiency makes her a nightmare for teams that lack cleansing or debuff resistance. And then there's Nina, one of the most iconic PvP witches in Memento Mori. And for good reason. Her gameplay revolves around high evasion and stealing enemy buffs, which turns the tide of battle in her favor almost immediately. Nina is notorious for her synergy with Diane, whose EV debuff can boost Nina's evasion to near unhittable levels, especially in mirror matches or against teams without accurate attacks. This level of dodge-based sustain allows Nina to whittle down her opponents with precision and patience. While others struggle to land hits, Nina steals buffs, deals consistent damage, and gracefully avoids danger turn after turn. What's particularly brutal about facing a well-built Nina is the psychological warfare she imposes. She forces players to bring countermeasures like silence, ACC buffs, or even dedicated debuffers just to have a shot at clipping her wings. Without these, battles against her can quickly become one-sided slaughters, with your best buffs being turned against you. The longer she survives, and she will survive, the more control she gains over the match. Faya, Rusalka, and Nina may differ in role, tank retaliator, magic DPS, and evasion-based control, but they share one thing in common. They all demand respect, resources, and smart planning to counter. They're not just units you plug into a team, they become the very core of it. If you're lucky enough to have any of these witches built, you're already a step ahead of the competition in PvP. Together, these three form the cornerstone of the S+ tier. Whether you prefer to outlast your enemies, shut down their offense, or avoid their attacks altogether, the combined presence of Fia, Rusalka, and Nina provides an elite toolkit that few teams can counter easily. Facing them often feels like a checkmate in slow motion, and unless your opponent is equally prepared, they probably won't make it past turn 3. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.